Good afternoon, and welcome to this session of our tech conference. This session is titled Digital Transformation, Creating a Culture that Thrives on Change. I would like to remind everybody that our presenters will take questions at the end of the session. So if you please use the question link that's in the YouTube chat, you can submit your questions and we'll be able to do those questions live. So now from the University of Kansas, I'd like to present Rob Caffey and Matt DeCane. Gentlemen, go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
You can hear me, huh? All right. Well, I'm going to start by sharing my screen. This is the first time I have ever presented to a conference virtually this way, so I hope that it goes well. If you told me when I first signed up to do this that we would be I would be standing in my attic presenting this, I would have told you you were crazy. But here we are. So this conversation is about digital transformation and creating a culture that thrives on change. So, pardon me. So I don't know about you all, but during the pandemic, while we've been on lockdown, I've spent a lot of time on video conferences, much like we're in right now. Spent a lot of time on Zoom, on Teams, Skype, whatever your particular system happens to be. I imagine you've spent a lot of time that way as well. It was kind of interesting leaving in a hurry and suddenly working with everybody from a distance. As in IT, a lot of us have been used to working at a distance, but suddenly having everybody work that way was quite a jolt. I think we've really reached an inflection point, though, and even once we get to the point where we go back to working face-to-face and sitting across the table from each other, that some of the things that we've taken away from this experience will continue, and I think that's probably a good thing. So I haven't always been in video meetings. In addition to that, I've spent some time reading books and watching Netflix. I imagine that's not terribly unique in this situation, but what may be unique for me is that I don't read, fiction books and the normal things that people like to read. I read like nerdy IT management books, and some of those I started reading when I was a graduate student. I'm one of those people that went to grad school late in life while I was working full time, but I developed an interest in learning more about sort of the trade that I work in. So I read books about IT management trends, about culture, process, about software development, team building, agility, all that kind of thing. And there's one book in particular called The Phoenix Project that many of you may have read. When I started at KU in January, Matt DeCine, who's presenting with me today, had also read this book, and we talked about some of the ways it had influenced our understanding of modern IT delivery. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I also spent a bunch of time during this pandemic watching Netflix. And as an aside, my wife and I are currently watching Dexter, binging it a few episodes every night. When that first came out, we didn't watch it for some reason. I think it was because our kids were the age that they were watching Dora the Explorer and Bob the Builder, and movies about, or television shows about serial killer vigilantes just didn't fit into our family paradigm. But it's a good show and we're catching up. I guess maybe the more important takeaway concerning Netflix is that they have rolled with the changes just fine. They have not had a problem with the increased demand that the coronavirus pandemic has put on them. People are staying home, social distancing, and streaming videos. And a lot of the reasons that they have been successful in meeting that demand have to do with technology, but a lot have to do with culture. When you think about Netflix, a lot of IT people will think about things like Chaos Monkey or their Spinnaker product, which is their continuous delivery platform. And Chaos Monkey, if you're not familiar with it, is basically a set of scripts or some tools, software tools that will go out and take down a server in their infrastructure, or in some cases take down an entire rack of servers or an entire data center, and they will have to make sure they engineer and design their infrastructure so that it can sort of roll with that, and you can still watch your Dexter at home even if there's an outage. the theory behind this has to do with developing a mutable infrastructure, ephemeral servers, and all that. You've probably heard the term, your servers should be cattle, not pets. If they're acting up, you should be able to kill them off and start a new one. So these are the technical tools that a lot of people think of with Netflix, but I would submit to you that a lot of the reason they have been so successful in pushing the envelope from a technical IT service delivery perspective is because of their culture. And they have this freedom and responsibility culture where you have a lot of freedom, but with it comes great responsibility. They have several aspects of the culture, and famously Netflix has a culture deck that I've linked later in the slide presentation. You can go see it, that talks about their culture. If you want to do a deep dive into that, it's probably worth a read. But I really like this concept of values or what we value. So one of the examples they use in the slide deck is that Enron, their primary tenets of their culture were integrity, communication, respect, and excellence. And clearly, they didn't live those. So the values of an institution are not necessarily what they say, but rather how they work. I like this concept of control or context versus control. This is going to come up later when we talk about a book from Mark Schwartz called War and Peace in IT that talks about enterprise IT as a complex adaptive system. And this concept of being highly aligned and loosely coupled is really important. Not all these concepts work in higher ed. We're probably not going to be paying top of the market. If you came to higher ed IT hoping to get top market pay, you've missed the boat. This is not what we get, but there are lots of benefits to being in higher ed IT. I really love it. And one of the things I like about it is that we share and collaborate like we're doing here today. You can't really change culture easily, but you can change behavior, and that's what DevOps is about. So there's a lot of different pieces that go into DevOps, and you'll have people that are adherents to one version or another. You'll have people that love waterfall project management versus agile project management, and a lot of times these things are seen as being at odds with each other. But the premise here is that with DevOps, all of these things come together. The lean manufacturing concepts, ITIL, IT service management concepts, Agile, all sort of feed into this concept of DevOps. My interest in DevOps came up from reading books back in grad school, some of the ones that we're going to talk about here today. I did do a foundation certificate in DevOps about a year ago. So if you're interested in that, I think it's worth a couple of days of class to go through that exercise. So some of these concepts are good for different size organizations. And I think I can say that some of these concepts are good all the time, and all of them are good some of the time. If you have a larger organization, all of the concepts that we're talking about here today will probably be more valuable. And if you're in an environment where there's a great deal of change and uncertainty, you'll also extract more value from the various concepts that we have here. So DevOps itself is a collection of ways of thinking. It's really a movement or a way of thinking about IT service delivery. It came from the software development side of the house, but it's not exclusively about software development. It really is a way of thinking. It is not specifically a framework in itself, but it does use and leverage all of these other frameworks. And all of them, to some degree or another, are roughly based on this concept of what people refer to as the Deming cycle, or the PDCA cycle if you're a Lean Six Sigma person, where you plan, do, check, and act. And I challenge you throughout the rest of this presentation to find places where this Deming cycle in different forms continues to show up over and over, because it's foundational to continual process improvement and the delivery of value in IT. So I am going to stop sharing now and turn over to Matt, who's going to talk about some specific examples from some of the books that we talked about.
Thank you so much, Rob. Hi, can you hear me all right? Okay, good. It's nice to have someone else in the room to give you a nice little thumbs up. But I thank all of you for attending today. The two books that I read were The Phoenix Project and The Unicorn Project. And in The Phoenix Project, a manager over a small server team gets promoted to CIO because the former CIO is asked to leave. And one of the first things that he does is he tries to problem solve a huge outage. And he asks, okay, well, what changes did we make that might have caused this outage? And no one can give him a straight answer. And so in the Phoenix Project, one of the first things he does is he says, okay, we need to know what we're doing and what we're working on. And so he attends the CAB meeting, which no one else attends. So he sends an email to say, hey, we all need to be attending this change advisory board meeting. Please, I expect to see you there the next one. So he goes the next time and he hears shouting. People are frustrated that the process is so complicated. The forms that they have to fill out have so many required fields, and they just have things that don't match the production environment, so they can't even find exactly what they need in order to submit their changes. And so he goes, okay, I hear that. Those are valid concerns. Let's just go to paper cards and a whiteboard. I want everyone to fill out a paper card that says who's going to make the change, what the change is, and when the change is. And so they start filling out these paper cards, and it immediately raises the question, what is a change? And they debate this, and they start asking questions. Is running a script a change, or is it only a change if you change the script? And they start engaging in conversation around changes. And eventually, later on in the book, they are able to put these changes up in a visual space that everyone can see, and they can start identifying patterns of changes. They can start seeing conflicting changes, as well as being able to identify people that are maybe doing too many changes. And I'll talk about that more a little bit. All that goes in line with IT service management. And that question of what is a change? Well, ITIL has answered that question, and they've actually categorized a bunch of things. They've created common language around changes, incidents, problems, and all those are listed here. I'm not going to go through all those, but I think before you can do any change improvement, you have to agree on what is a change and what the language around those things is. Rob told you to look for the Denning cycle, and on the first slide here, I already have an example of it, where you plan and you do service design, and then you do and you check, where you transition your service to that design, and then you act, where you continually operate that service. And all of that is just continual improvement. In the book, the Change Advisory Board, they started where they were at. They kept it simple and practical by going to cards. They optimized and automated. Later on, they started adding additional features into the cards to be able to see if a change was risky or if one person was doing too many changes. They got feedback from people that had to submit the changes, as well as management, so they could progress iteratively. They collaborated with people. Previously, they just told people, this is what you have to do, and they didn't really gather much feedback. They tried to understand what the value of the Change Advisory Board was. And in this case, the value was being able to address root cause of big outages and prevent future outages, which is really important. And then allowing you to see just a big picture of everything going on allows you to work holistically so that you're keeping other people's changes in mind. Going back to identifying patterns, they identified that one person, Brent, was being assigned a lot of high priority changes. And in the book, Brent is a fantastic engineer. He's super helpful. He's super knowledgeable. He knows everything about so many different systems. So he just has everything in his mind of how it all connects. And because of that, whenever someone's doing an upgrade or a maintenance event, they ask him to help them out. Anything that gets hard or anything that runs into any problems, they ask him first. Because he's really helpful and he has a great attitude, he gets on the radar of people in the organization that have VP in their title, and they contact him directly to address whatever need they have. So his phone is constantly ringing. Maybe in our world, that's kind of anybody with a C at the start of their title having a direct line to you. But he's just constantly getting barraged with requests because he's really good. And anytime anything goes wrong and anything's on fire, he gets brought in. So the problem with this is that he's doing all this work and he's doing it really well and he's a great engineer, but he's not focusing on the Phoenix project, which in this case is the core project that the business is depending on to rescue them financially. And so he's shirking some responsibilities to do all these other things. And to address this in the book, they allow other developers to not contact Brent and to kind of do the hard work themselves. While it might take them longer, they're putting in the reps in order to get stronger. If they're always passing the weight to Brent, he's going to keep getting stronger and keep doing recs until they do the hard work. They're not going to get much better as developers or as admins. They also focus on records to make sure that everyone has those fixes that Brent's doing recorded. They allow, sometimes he can just think of the solution, but they always follow up with what worked, what solved it, and making sure that those are on record so that other people can do those same solutions later on. And they use that in order to train up other people to take responsibility away from Brent. One of his complaints in the book is that it takes a week to train somebody, but only a day to do a task. So he is against training people because it takes him so much longer and he has so many other things going on. Well, if you ever run into that, one thing that you could do is have that person automate some of the complexity so that it's easier to train someone else to do that really difficult job. One of the biggest things they do in the book is they turn off Brent's phone. They forward it all to his manager and they set up an away message in Outlook that says he's working on the Phoenix project. Please do not bother him. Talk to the manager instead. And so they cut off all access to him other than through a clear, prioritized system. All these changes allow Brent to start attending Phoenix project meetings and be involved in decisions from the very beginning, rather than being brought in when things become a problem. So it allows him to be a lot more proactive rather than reactive. And Brent is a fantastic illustration of the theory of constraints, which goes along with the lean methodology. So the theory of constraints is that in all processes, you have one part that is a constraint that's limiting the flow of the other processes. And in Brent's case, it's probably not a single pipe going into one small bubble. It's probably a lot of pipes going into a big bubble, but it's getting filled up faster than it can produce the flow through the whole system. And so Brent is a constraint in this case. And the theory of constraints says you should first identify the constraint and then exploit the constraint. Now, this means just making sure that that part of the process has the most work that it can handle. That doesn't mean exploiting Brent to the point where he has to come in on weekends or he has to do 60-hour weeks. It means just making sure he has enough to work on. That's not a problem in this case. Subordinate and synchronizing to the constraint means redirecting those pipes so that they're not all flowing to Brent, so that he can have space to focus on the most important jobs and that those can flow through his pipes. Whereas these other things like upgrading or putting out fires or getting calls about pet projects, all of those are subordinate to him focusing on the most important thing. And by eliminating those distractions in the book, they were able to elevate his performance so he'd be able to get through those most important tasks a lot easier. And then finally, you repeat the process, going back to the Denning cycle. If you just do this all once and do it one time, well, eventually you're going to run into another constraint. And if you're not working to identify that, you'll get stuck in the same place. The Unicorn Project is a parallel book to the Phoenix Project. And while the Phoenix Project focuses more on operations, the Unicorn Project focuses more on development. in it, the main character is Maxine, who's a developer that's assigned to the Phoenix project. And she spends a week just trying to get things up and running, just trying to get Phoenix to run on her laptop. And it's a mess. She has to go all over the organization, submitting tickets to get access to certain environments, trying to get scripts that build certain parts of the process, running out to try to find keys and credentials and all that type of stuff. Eventually, she gets all that information, takes longer than a week. And when she goes to build it, it takes 24 hours to build. When she starts developing with another person, she realizes that after they develop a bug fix or a feature, it goes off to the QA team and sits there for 2 weeks and then comes back. And so there's a lot of time in between even building and knowing if you have an error, or doing a business logic improvement and then taking 2 weeks to get information back from the QA team. When she asks why this is the way it is, everyone just points the finger at other departments. Well, it's because of security, or it's because QA is slow, or it's because we don't have the servers that we need. I'm not responsible for that. Go talk to this person. Everyone is working to just kind of shift the blame off of themselves and to ultimately protect their jobs and their time, so that they don't get the brunt of, well, this failed because of you. Later on in the book, things get much better. To make things easier to run, they start using containers and creating environments that are self-contained so that people can run code a lot more efficiently. They create automated processes. They involve security and all the operations people to make sure that these processes do all those complicated steps that they used to have to do. They get fast feedback when they do a feature. They run it through those processes and it runs all the QA stuff right there so that they know that they're working on the most important thing and that it's solving the problem. It becomes a lot more collaborative, a lot less finger pointing. And ultimately, because of all those changes, they can focus on doing things that make customers happy. And so instead of focusing on protecting themselves as a developer or as a team, they focus externally on their customers to make sure that they are getting the features that are making the product worth using. I'm going to go over this fairly quickly, but the Agile Manifesto values individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiations, and responding to change rather than following a plan. It doesn't mean that the things on the right, processes and whatnot, are not important. It just means that they're less important. Agile has these two ideas, Scrum and Kanban, that KU has used recently in order to respond to some of the needs of COVID. So when students left campus, they were entitled to refunds from parking, housing, and dining. And that process was pretty complicated, and it was hard to know where to go, and it was hard to know if you qualified for one of those or all of those. And so my team built a portlet that showed students what they needed to do and what they could expect. And that portlet took us a month to build, but we did it in 1 week increments where we had a lot of features that were requested and put in the backlog. We met once a week with core stakeholders that allowed us to prioritize which of those were most important for the week. We met every day and tracked our progress on development. And then once a week, we met with stakeholders and demonstrated where we were at and got feedback from stakeholders. And within a month, we were able to spin up something that everyone was happy with, that allowed students to not only make sure that they got the money they were entitled to, but to get it really quickly. And we tracked all of that in a really simple planner board. There's a lot of tools out there that can do Kanban. We used to be able to do, stickies on a whiteboard, but a little bit harder to do right now. Planner is just one that we tried. I think this is available on a lot of other tools, but it was really useful just to see what type of things we were working on. Again, those 2 books were the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Rob to introduce you to a lot of other interesting books.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I am trying to share. This is the first time I've done a virtual conference this way, so bear with me. So Matt talked about some of those books and some of these concepts. I like kind of think of the DevOps concept as sort of the grand unified theory of IT service delivery, because all of these different paradigms that frameworks that we've been talking about, I think can be used in some way to support the effort. When I did the foundation certification in DevOps, one of the things that they talk about a lot are the principles of DevOps that are also referred to as the 3 ways. And the first way really is about systems thinking. In Matt's example of the Unicorn Project, where they focus on making customers happy, that's what the first way is about. This is about delivering value through the value chain, whatever that may be. This may be delivering software, it may be writing reports, it might be adding value to the process of identifying new software to be purchased and integrated. Whatever your value chain is for your size of organization, that's what this is about. You want to deliver value, take stuff from devs, move it into operations. You can think of this as moving downstream or moving left to right. Matt talked about the Kanban board. That's what you do there. You want to see work move from the left to the right as it gets closer and closer to being done. You want work to flow downstream, you want value to flow downstream, you want defects to not flow downstream, and you want to seek to increase this flow all the time, because as you increase flow, you increase value. The second way in the principles of DevOps is all about creating feedback loops and amplifying those feedback loops. So if you're delivering something to the institution, if you can know how well it's being used, or if it's being used at all and to what extent, and what people's perceptions of it are. And this isn't just necessarily about asking people if they're happy with what you delivered, but it's about looking at metrics and key performance indicators and things like that tell you what's going on. And when you have feedback loops, you want to try to get more of them, more frequent, shorten them, and amplify them wherever possible. And then the third way is basically doing all this and doing it as fast as you can or as frequently as you can. And to do so, you need to create a culture that fosters experimentation, risk-taking, and learning. You want to seek mastery through practice, right? If you try something and it doesn't work, don't shoot the messenger, just move on and learn from it and try something different. And that's the best way to make sure that you're making the best use of meager resources. Another important concept in DevOps is this issue of continuous delivery, and you'll hear this talked about a lot. A lot of people will talk about the tools that are used in continuous delivery, the CI/CD pipeline and things like that. They will talk about that as what DevOps is really all about. But I submit to you that most of the practitioners in DevOps will tell you it's really much more about the culture and the way of thinking about these things than it is about the tools. Continuous delivery is important. Continuous delivery includes things like automated testing, continuous development testing, continuous integration, continuous monitoring. It's about things like managing infrastructure as code. Matt mentioned containerization, microservice architectures, cloud infrastructure, some of these things. You don't have to have a full DevOps culture to effectively use the cloud, but your experience using the cloud will be better and you'll extract value from it faster. And you don't have to be working in the cloud to leverage DevOps, but if you are, you will see value from it faster. So they work hand in hand. I like to think of that the third way of DevOps is really just being this Deming cycle on repeat. So here we are back again. I think that the more uncertain the environment that you're in, the more important it is that you shorten the feedback cycle. You shorten how long it takes you to plan, do, check, and act. If you can shorten your project delivery through these cycles from 6 months to 6 weeks, that's great. If you can go from 6 months to 6 days, that's better. If you can go from 6 days to 6 hours, now you're really doing something, because you don't want to waste even a half a day, if you can, go in the wrong direction, especially in a highly uncertain environment. And I think we can all agree that we're experiencing some relatively uncertain environments. A very simple concept is DevOps, but it's frequently misunderstood. I think it's a terrible name, really, if you want to get right down to it. It sounds very techy. It sounds like, we're a smaller IT shop. We don't do development, so we don't need this. But I think it's poorly named. Great concepts, but they should have included some marketing and communications people in this, I think, before they named it. But the ship has sailed. But at a high level, I think the important takeaway when you think about DevOps is the traditional model of IT. You sort of have these two sides of the operation. You have developers who want change, who want to deliver value, be it software or reports, or they want to close tickets. They want to deliver value to the business. So they want that change to happen as quickly as they can. On the operations side, they frequently want to slow down change. Their value is seen in terms of stability. If the services are always up and resilient, and one way to achieve that is to make sure they change as infrequently as possible. But the problem is that both of these things need to happen. Both of these things provide value to the institution. And so there's this wall of confusion between these operations and development that are going on simultaneously, but somewhat at cross purposes. And you may be able to think of examples at your own institution where, having this lack of understanding about what's going on, or even working at cross purposes, creates some of the problems that you find. But if you tear down these walls and you use these DevOps principles, you can get past that, and you can get, this diagram shows two intersecting circles, much like the Deming cycle, going different directions, but feeding each other in a sustaining loop that is a virtuous cycle that improves delivery, from building, testing, releasing, deploying, operating, monitoring, planning, coding, and then eventually building another version. And you just continue this cycle, continue to improve over time. Those are the basic concepts of DevOps. It's not just about Dev and Ops. This comes from the software industry predominantly, but I have seen it used effectively in all types of service delivery, particularly in IT service delivery. But a lot of these concepts work, just in managing any kind of service delivery at all. This guy is Gene Kim. He's one of my nerd heroes. He is a co-author of the Phoenix Project, and actually he wrote about half the books that we're talking about today. And he shares my belief that ITSM and DevOps and these different concepts are not at odds with each other, but they are actually a quite perfect cultural match. And so it would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about institutional culture. And this Ron Westrom's model of organizational culture is frequently used in the DevOps community to talk about the archetypes of culture. So there are three archetypes: pathological culture, a bureaucratic culture, and a generative culture. And then there's 6 different cultural aspects. So think about the pathological culture. You may have been part of one of these. It's not very much fun. This is where it's sort of a bunch of warlords trying to gain power. If I'm going to take something, it's a zero-sum game. If I'm going to get some resources, I'm going to have to take them from somewhere else. low cooperation, messengers shot. People don't want to be responsible because then they get in trouble. You don't want to build bridges with different areas because then they're going to try to sap your resources away or something. And if you fail, you don't want to be on the bottom of the pile in a pathological culture. So to get away from this novel crushing pathological culture, we institute rules and we move in the direction of a bureaucratic organization. And this is a little bit better because there's the people behave a little bit better. There's at least a little bit of modest cooperation. Messengers aren't necessarily shot. There's a little bit bridging takes place. And if someone fails, then we find out why. There's a careful adjudication process to hold people accountable. But in a generative culture, it moves even beyond a rule-oriented culture to one where there's high cooperation. Messengers are trained, risks are shared, bridging is encouraged, and that sort of thing. Some of the pitfalls, even if you are able to get all the way over to a generative organizational model, is that ignoring the culture, especially at the top levels of the organization, or treating technical work as a technical process only, will lead to heading the wrong direction. And focusing on local team cultures. So if you've got a manager that has a really strong subculture in one of their teams, and that sort of pervades and is dominant over the global culture, that can be a problem too, in the same way that the theory of constraints holds that you don't want to optimize locally, you want to optimize the entire system. So I figure I have to throw in at least one. The Little Prince is not one of the books on the bookshelf that we have today, but this is an inspirational quote, and I think it fits into the culture discussion quite nicely, in that in a generative environment, you don't want to be the person that's just assigning tasks to people and checking up to see if they've done them, but you want to inspire people, teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea rather than managing their tasks. So some of the books that
And Rob, I wanted to be cognizant of time, and seeing as we have 5 minutes left,
yes,
we might open it up to questions.
Okay. That is fine. We can do that. I have the books that I have here are all listed on the presentation that I shared.
Well, gentlemen, we had about 50 people watching, which is great turnout. Actually, there are no questions at this time unless somebody hears me talking and wants to submit one. I do have one comment from Butler County that said, no question. Thank you for sharing this information. DevOps is life. So I would say if there are some more books you want to share, well, we have just a couple more minutes, or if you want to go ahead and wrap it up, I'll also tell everyone that, and I can start my video if Dakota will get it going here. On the sessions page of the website, Matt and Rob have uploaded their presentation, and you can download it. It's in Adobe format. So just go to their page on the sessions page, and you'll be able to see this. Are all of the books on your slide presentation there, Rob, that you were talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
All of the books that that went into the presentation here today, and the things that we talked about, and even the ones we didn't get to, are listed there. And there's also a page of links to some of these high-level concepts. If people want to go out and study more, I certainly would encourage that.
Are your email addresses on the slides?
They don't appear to be. I can be reached at m.d@ku.edu.
Okay.
And I can be reached, Rob Caffey, no spaces, ROBCAFFEY is my full name, @ku.edu.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody else did too. And thanks for attending Check.
Thanks.